Hello and welcome to Holistic Circle Podcast, Spiritual Conversation. My name is Philipp Kobald. We are reaching out to people who are passionate about spreading light, love, and joy. And from Wales, Clare Martin. Hello, Clare.
Hi, Philip. Nice to see you.
I'm looking forward for this podcast. It'll be a bit different, looking at the last couple of weeks where we had our Gardnerian magicians, or we had all kind of people who communicate with angels, aliens, old Egyptian tomb climbing. So it was a whole world of going deep into mysticism, talking to the stars, singing with the stars, and it is all great, and I enjoyed it. But this is a podcast from a total different nature, because now we finally actually going to bring it into practice, bring it into the world, all of these wisdoms and knowledge, and help people in the real world environment to actually make their life, their daily life better with small but decisive steps. So I'm looking forward that we're bringing all of this metaphysics and all of these thoughts and philosophies into the reality. So thank you so much for coming and sharing your knowledge with us. I would very much love if you would take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself to the audience, give a bit of a background before we start talking about realities.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be talking with you. And my background is very much from a psychology perspective. I did my undergrad in it, and then went on to teach psychology for many years and specialized in the field of applied positive psychology. So I did my master's in that. And for many years now, I've been running my business, which is Goldcrest Training. And our signature training is around looking after leaders and specifically supporting them to become Wellbeing ambassadors. So the Wellbeing Ambassador program is a kind of key focus of what I'm trying to achieve at the moment, to get organizations to recognize that they need to take a proactive, evidence-based approach to well-being, to really engage their people, to support their people. I'm an author of the book, The Wellbeing Ambassadors, which, again, is really a blueprint, description of how people can make these changes and some of the challenges that they'll face, because, it's not always easy to bring everybody on board and see the need. Often we'll see in organizations that they wait until crisis point, until they, do something to support their people. So my vision and drive is really about helping organizations to train their leaders in really practical tools that can create a sustainable culture of well-being, so that it's something that's embedded into everyday practice, into the systems, ideally within the organization, but also in the way that they interact with people, to not just show they care, but also actually have tools that help them to thrive. So creating balance between well-being and performance. And that's really key for the leaders too. So the rate of burnout for leaders can be quite high. They're giving a lot to other people. Yeah, so that's where my passions and I suppose a little bit of my background lies.
Right. So to prepare the audience properly, we'll have basically two big chunks of things we have to talk about. One is the tools and the techniques and all the possibilities. And as you said, science-based, why this makes people better, why more healthy and so forth. So this is one element. And the other one is a bit sticky, tricky, is about the complexity, because a lot of people say they do what you do, and then 6 months later, it's gone. A lot of people come in high and riding on the horse or whatever motorcycle, however you imagine it. And they come in these corporations and they're making the weekend seminars and the retreats, and they're making all of it, and everybody's excited and everybody's so happy and it all feels great and good. And once they leave the building, it's fading away, or it doesn't stick. It's just always ping and ping. That's great in itself, but that's just not what actually makes change happen. And that leads us to maybe a last chapter, find interesting to a little bit talk about it. And maybe we'll start in this chapter, the so to say the curious one. There's one thing when a person hits the wall, when a person has a cancer diagnosis or whatever happens, and then they say, I can't continue living like this any longer. I have to reach out. I have to go to therapy. I have to go to meditation. I have to do something. I got to change my life. This is the one big block where most therapists get their clients. I think it's rather interesting that you are, so to say, a therapist that goes to a person who says, well, I'm kind of feeling fine. And you're like, no, let's feel better. And I think it's so interesting to confront a person that is not necessarily in pain with the idea of improvement and how you are cleverly, sneakily prepare his brain to let him know, things can be better. And that I'd love to hear from you, because that must be quite clever.
Well, I suppose the distinction for me between therapy and the work that I do, so I'm not a therapist, I'm a psychological coach, is about saying, where are we at and what could we do to move forward? So not necessarily better, that we might be looking at performance, we might be looking at well-being. My drive is to focus on both those things. So that's where the sustainability piece comes in. How can we push ourselves to achieve more while also looking after our well-being? And when we enter into that state, it's a state of thriving. So one of the models that I use, specifically in my training, but a lot with organizations, is to actually describe well-being not as a continuum, which it often in the past has been described as sort of like a linear process, where at one end, we have that kind of crisis point that you just described, that hitting the wall, burnout or severe mental health challenges, through to the other end on a continuum where we look at it and go, oh, everything's good, they're mentally healthy. What psychologists have proposed for, the last 15, 20 years is this idea that actually it's a quadrant model. So we have a continuum of mental ill health to positive health, but then we sort of have a vertical axis where we look at our optimal well-being, subjective well-being, at a high level through to a low level. And what this really helps get people to recognize, like, where am I fitting at the moment? Where in my life am I on that sort of quadrant model? Because the top right-hand side is, if we've got great well-being and we are, our mental health is okay, we don't have loads of life challenges, then we are in a state of thriving. Thriving, and I define it in relation to a model I have called the Rest and Rise model, and the RISE stands for, we see increased resilience, innovation, success, and engagement when somebody's in a state of thriving. So there's all sort of positive benefits, and this is based on the research that's been done in applied settings. But if you come down in your level of well-being, so if you come down on that scale, so people stop looking after themselves, whether that's physically, emotionally, or psychologically, they actually move into a place of struggle. So they might not be experiencing severe mental health problems, but because they'd come down to the lower half of the quadrant model, they've entered into this place where they're kind of surviving. And in a workplace, you'll see this, and often from the outside, they appear to be performing often quite well. They are surviving. They're getting the job done. They're meeting their targets. But beneath that, they're treading water. And often, when you give people that opportunity to stop and reflect, they know it. They know they're not looking after themselves. They know this isn't sustainable. And so it's opening up that conversation and moving it away from it necessarily being this question of like, are we struggling right now with our mental health? Are we experiencing or even diagnosed with a mental health condition? It's saying before that point, we need to start noticing, how am I? How do I feel? And so that reflective process, sometimes people are in that surviving quadrant, so the bottom, they're finding themselves already in the struggling quadrant with physical health problems or mental health problems, then often it's as you described, that it's much more obvious to them and people around them, and maybe the help's there. But if we can get them to do something proactive with their well-being, despite the challenges they might be facing in life, we can move them up into a space of thriving.
So I will translate this for the moment, and it might change throughout the conversation, but at the moment I see you're appealing to the logical side of your clients. You're trying to talk with them in reason, numbers, charts. That's how I catch how I translate it so far. Well, let's wait and see. I'll have to ask a sensitive question, because I will have to address it, at least for a moment, because this is something that a lot of viewers now will think, oh God, these people just want to tune those working bees to perform better. They're using spirituality so people have a better bottom line. They don't really care for their humanity. All this corporation want is so they're not only work now, they also have to work happy.
And
It's
it's a real challenge. And, in my work, I care. I genuinely am trying to do something that is meaningful and has positive impact. So what I saw in the past, I would often be invited in to do an hour workshop, a 1 hour webinar over their lunch break. And I try to inspire and share some great ideas and tools. But the reality is, and you mentioned this at the beginning, that this idea that unfortunately people get, maybe a little bit of something out of it, a little bit of a boost, but essentially they're then going to go back to the system they're part of. They're going to go back to their desk, and they're not necessarily going to really benefit from it. And so people are absolutely right to be concerned around this idea of, is well-being now just like another thing that has to happen, and somehow we're supposed to be happy and positive all the time? And I don't think that's the case. Positive psychology, the field that I have really specialized in some ways will occasionally get the bad rep just because of its name. And yet a key element of all of the research around well-being and from positive psychology, it's not just about happiness, which is also great, like it feels good to feel happy, but it's also about finding meaning and purpose and understanding who we are when we're at our best. So it takes away from that idea of it being superficial to actually get people to stop and really reflect. Your sort of interpretation of the model I described, and it's tricky on a podcast, I shared a visual model, but in some ways it actually takes away some of the logic and takes away some of the need for language and actually invites people to just stop and reflect. So to kind of go inside and have a moment where they are saying to themselves, like trying to tap into something inside that says, how am I doing? As opposed to looking at metrics and numbers and measurement tools in that sense.
It was a preliminary observation. And by the way, the best answer I heard to this crazy question of mine a couple of days ago, when a person similar said to me, oh, I'm a Trojan horse. I come in with optimization and then I sneak in all kind of. So I thought it was a genius answer. Well, you took it head on. Thank you so much. It has to be asked because by the end of the day, of course, if you improve people, no matter how big or small, it will have an effect on their life. And whatever might be the company's intention to pay you, but they can hardly control the outcome. Once you put the seeds within people's mind, that's the stuff that they cannot control ultimately. So I guess it's a slippery slope. And that's why I was so happy to have you here as a guest, because, we all can philosophize a lot about a better world. And I have each and every day people come into the podcast dreaming about a better world and the oneness and Gaia and all of it. And I'm 100% behind everything. But when I think about the practical implication, this is getting very difficult. We can have those great visions about the oneness and being in touch. And I am 100% behind. I'm a spirit podcaster. But then I know, because I run companies on my own, I run my own companies and I have employees. And I know putting these theories into practice is a really slippery slope.
Yeah, it's challenging. And I think for me, on my own personal exploration of spirituality goes beyond the theory that I have trained in from a psychology perspective. But what I see is there is a need for a bridge between that, so that people who aren't ready to talk about really deeply spiritual things or engage in what might be considered spiritual practices, that they're still having some access. They're getting that seed is being sown of even just connecting with self, just taking a moment and stopping and checking in with self and asking, how am I right now? What is going on? Am I in a state of survival? And I haven't even realized it. I've been so ingrained in it for the last 6 months, just getting by, or 6 years. And that for me is the beginning of like this collective understanding that we need to do more to connect with other people, to understand ourselves better, to question what work looks like, what is thriving at work, what does that mean to different people in different organizations, different industries, but also in different life stages. So I think it's so nuanced. And a lot of the work that I'm doing and the sort of principle behind the Wellbeing Ambassador program is, if you are training people in an organization to ambassador well-being, they have that cultural understanding. They've got those insights into that. What is their system like? What is the culture like in that industry, that, you know, that particular company or organization? And they then have that ability to start making those small changes that then they're relatable to the people they're working with, rather than coming in with what for some people is such a new idea that they haven't even conceived of that stuff. And for most people, it can put a sort of a barrier up. We sort of shut down and go, "Ooh, too much. I don't know what any of that means." So there's a goal from my perspective to use a lot of and some of it is logic, you know, the cognitive theories and ideas that can relate to where people are at, to start moving them towards hopefully a stronger, more resilient, and, you know, ultimately happier and place of thriving at work.
So we explain it like this: you can either go to Africa and build a well, and then hopefully the village will get the water and take care of it, or you can go to Africa with a shovel and put it in someone's hand and say, "Well, now I'm going to show you how to build a well." That's basically where we are, and that is where we are starting now this conversation going further. Now, one micro question, super short. These people, they come to you on themselves, these managers, or their boss is hiring you? Just quickly, with what mindset they come, and they're forced to learn it, or they want to participate? Just a micro question, so we a little bit quickly understand who is mainly sitting across of you.
It's a little bit of a mix. Mostly I'm going into organizations. So somebody typically higher up in the organization, whether it's HR or the director, has brought me in. So in those cases, people are, say, invited. I like to use the word, but, you know, they're expected to be there. And in that case, it does depend on the organization. Sometimes you'll have a little bit of resistance in the sense that they haven't necessarily chosen to be there and it is new to them. I guess I thrive a little bit off that, like bringing people on board, sowing those seeds, seeing those little breakthroughs, finding ways to get them to understand and appreciate what's going on.
All right. Okay. Now, so basically you spend all your free time on the golf course. All right. Let's now start. Let's make the chapter where we talk about the techniques and the tools that you eventually want these people to, again, these people then supposed to execute it for you. So these are your little minions that you train, your little soldiers, and then go into these organizations and spread well-being and positiveness into the organization. So tell me the tools that you teach them, and then maybe a little bit also always explain how would you imagine that this manager who is invited coming to your program, he's happy to learn, you motivate him, you engaged him. What do you expect him then to do in practice with his teams of, I don't know, call center or whatever his team is, so that people really see, that's what he had supposed to do in hands-on?
Yeah. So the structure of the program is divided into 3 different modules. And the first part is recognition that as a leader, one of the key things if you're going to be a wellbeing ambassador is you have to live it. So it's around personal wellbeing. So we start the process with understanding what we mean by wellbeing. There's lots of different models and theories out there, but the structure that I use is we focus on the physical, the emotional, and psychological wellbeing. So we just start that process of like, what is this? What do we mean by it? And then what specifically could we do to improve it? So it's inviting them as a leader to question, reflect, and we draw on different tools.
So just let's be a little bit more really practical. Do they make health checks? Are you running with them around the building? I mean, just the techniques a little bit here and there, so people get from the theory into a visualization. You know, now they're on the treadmill and like, you know, you can do it.
Yeah, I'd love to have time for all of that, but I'm also not a physical trainer. So no, we don't go into the physical elements of it. What we do is get them to reflect. Because most people, when you actually ask them, are you doing things to promote your health from an activity point of view? Are you getting enough movement? Are you eating well? We have the conversation and I share tools with them around the basics of, are we getting out from our desk in the day? So many people work remote, they're not even moving around. Are you minimum getting out for 20 minutes, walk during the day? Lots of people are doing more exercise than that, but some people, plenty of people I work with aren't even getting bare minimums.
Let me politely stop you here. So your fear is you talked with them about, do you get exercise, do you get the work, do you get off the desk? And so you hope that this manager will in future in the communication and the one-on-one and the FaceTime with his staff ask this question. Is that the theory that we're talking about? That he will take care of it, think about it. Do my people that I am the leader, do they get a little bit of a power? So I tell them, hey, did you make a walk today? Is this the frame that I need to understand, or I'm completely wrong with your program?
No, that's the beginning of it, because what we're saying is that leaders are, and there's a lot of research that suggests that, leaders are often burning out. They're not looking after themselves. Now, if we don't have our physical well-being sorted, then that impacts everything else. But we also talk about the emotional well-being, the idea that we need connection. We need not just connection to other people, but we broaden it out and talk about the idea of connecting with nature, taking time out, regenerating, recuperating by spending time, as I say, connecting with nature, connecting with other people. In the work environment, we're also asking about that. We're getting them to check in and go, well, do I feel connected? Do I feel like that's the sort of my emotional welfare is being looked after? Because if they're not even thinking about it, they're not questioning whether that's working for other people. And we talk about the psychological side of things as of growth and purpose. Is there a drive and a reason why we're doing what we're doing, and how do other people experience it? So we're really just starting that conversation about what do we mean by well-being? What does it look like for you as an individual? The next step is we take it into what we call strengths-based leading. So we start to give them really a structured tool. We use psychometric around character strengths, which gives us a common language for them to understand who they are when they're at the best. And this is where it starts to become really practical in strength spotting in their team, with their colleagues, with understanding how is it that we could embed this into the actual practices, like an appraisal or having a one-to-one or the next meeting they're running. Could they, one, be at their best in that moment? And often we're not at our best when we're stressed or we're in the survival mode. So deliberately drawing on different interventions, different tools from positive psychology, which invite you to think about, what are my strengths? Like, what would be most useful for me in this moment, in the thing I'm about to do, or in the way I'm about to interact with another person? And that kind of gives them the background to understand it and introduce it and support their people with those tools. And we also give them a specific toolkit. So it's a positive psychology Thrive toolkit, which gives them different structured guidance on interventions that they could experiment with. They could invite their people to have a go with, literally from mindfulness through to goal setting strategies with it, which have got much more of an angle that recognizes the benefits of positivity, recognizes the challenges around people sustaining things. So there's a lot of nuance in the detail of what we give, but we give them specific tools that have research in organizational settings that say that if you engage in these tools, you will increase not just well-being, but performance as well. And so that appeals from an organizational perspective, but it also has that meaningful aspect of helping people to thrive.
Right. I think I got most of it. So to make it so funny, so to say, when you said experimenting with mindfulness, so I got the picture in my head before the big conference call. There's a little chanting going on, and everybody's like, but that's of course just a humorous way. But next thing, do you follow up? Is there part of the training that you do that you just then after like a couple of months, 6-7 months after the training, a little bit continuously meet once or twice with these people and see what did you implement? What was the reaction? Is there an aftermath?
Yeah. So one of the key things that we do in the training and the rest and rise model, which I briefly mentioned, rest and rise, the principle around it is as it sounds, that we need to rest in order to rise up. So it's like look after our well-being in order to perform well. But they're also acronyms. So the rest is a rest method. And this is the part that allows the leaders to really integrate what they're doing and make it relevant to their people. So it stands for, if you make an intervention you maybe choose to experiment with or to try in your organization, if you make it relatable, enjoyable, sociable, and trackable for the people you're doing with or for yourself, people are much more likely to sustain it. It's based on the sort of theories around change. It's based on self-determination theory, which talks about intrinsic motivation, why we do things just because, not because we've been told to do them. And what that helps the leaders do is actually integrate something and get people to see it as more than just, oh, I'm being told to do this. They're actually getting them to engage with it. So we see the sustainability because of the method and the way that we introduce these techniques. So it's not just, oh, here's a mindfulness app. Oh, here, you should go for a walk. We're getting them to look at it and say, how does this become really powerful for the people you work with? And then the RISE part of it is the acronym for Increased Resilience, Innovation, Success, and Engagement. And we measure that with a really simple pulse survey. We do it at the beginning. We follow up 3 months later. With some organizations, we'll actually organize development groups. So we'll bring the wellbeing ambassadors back together to have essentially group coaching. What's working, not what's not working, share the wins, iron out the challenges, iron out the problems, and actually sort of turn them into sort of a self-facilitating group where they can check in with each other, because it's keep momentum.
Would you say that this is extremely valuable? Because listening to you, I would imagine that this is one of the most valuable part.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. The impact of the training is great. I get some nice data on that, but it's how do we sustain it? And the only way to sustain it is to have this continuous kind of awareness and push. And if they have the chance to come back together, that's when we see the real impact. It's it's one of the challenges where I've run public courses, open courses where people can come from different organizations to train as a wellbeing ambassador. They're then going back to their organization on their own. And so the impact that they have is going to be limited.
And if I would have to make a voting, I would be so bold and say they even learn more when they're coming back in those reflecting meetings than they do with the initial training. That would be my best guess as an amateur here, because, this is always when things start to stick.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. When we have time to reflect, try it out, see what works, see what doesn't work, that's when the real learning happens. Yeah, absolutely.
And also the possibility to express failure or express frustration, and then hearing others having success. And so there's this group element then, this I think is such a wonderful thing. And without this supervision, this kind of stuff, I think it's very hard to keep it really sustainable without every couple of 6-7 months for a period of time. I think this is a key, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I like to use the word supervision there. And, that often comes into the professional field of counseling and therapy, but that is essentially what you need. You need somebody who's sort of leading the process of the wellbeing ambassadors to bring them together, is leading the wellbeing initiatives, setting the strategy. So one of the things we talk about is that, as a wellbeing ambassador, if you're just floating within an organization and there's no structure in place, there is only so much impact you can have. Yeah, bringing them back together happens when you have the hierarchy, the board, or the C-suite recognizing the importance of it. And it's being integrated into a wellbeing strategy. So the idea of having wellbeing ambassadors is part of the wellbeing strategy. And that's the first question often is, do you even have a wellbeing strategy? Many organizations will have a mental health strategy. So really looking at mental health at the crisis point, what do we do? What are the support services? Really important, absolutely needed. But where's that proactive approach? What is it that we're doing? And that's the piece here, that if we can get the strategy set, then we can get the full impact flowing through.
And I also think a lot of therapists and people like that watching this right now will be very happy with a supervision element, because by the end of the day, if you send this, so to say, not perfectly prepared people to start engaging, even if they don't work as a therapist, but if you start talking with people about anything that is well-being, you might hear or feel or get stuff that you might not even be prepared for if you want to or not. This is just an exchange of energies and information. So to give them some kind of supervision, some kind of a channel, I think is crucially important. It would be my personal thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge recognition that as a wellbeing ambassador, you're not instantly a counselor or a therapist. But I believe what happens with leaders is they're already in the situation you just described. That they are already in this position where, one, they're expected to support the well-being of their people, to ask those questions and get all sorts of things come up if they're a good leader and able to listen and open that and hold that space that they might not be prepared for. So training them as a wellbeing ambassador certainly is not even trying to prepare them for those conversations. I know that mental health first aid training often looks at kind of that angle of supporting people at crisis point. What we're saying is, can we have the tools to help people, normalize the idea that we do need to do something proactive for our well-being? It's not about waiting till we're ill. It's about saying, like, actually, we could do something now. And if the leaders have got the tools to embed that into everyday practice, into everything that's happening, and normalize the need for it through role modeling, but also by inviting and supporting their people. Yeah, I think that the conversations aren't always only at the crisis point, right? They start to be at an earlier stage, which is much more manageable for a leader to support with. And it means that the individual is getting support before it really gets to the point where they're struggling.
I don't want to put myself in this podcast so much, but it's one of my rules for all the managers in my companies. They have to go to supervision.
Okay.
It's a rule I'm having for more than 20 years, because I realized small or big things come up, and not every manager, they maybe know their stuff, but dealing with the human element can be sometimes quite tricky. Not everybody's well equipped.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, so leaders like you are already, believing that this is needed. And it's such a missed piece, I think, in any leadership development at the moment, is recognizing that they're expected to have so many hats. They expect to be able to look after the people in so many different ways, from supporting them with information and training and things, but also be there when they're struggling. And now we're also saying, actually, there's a responsibility, maybe certainly an ethical responsibility, to help people be at their best so that they are experiencing a state of thriving in their work. Because in some ways, don't we all deserve that?
And it's so great, because when I had this first time the idea, there was nothing like you offer out there on the market. And people said, well, I don't want to go to therapy. I said, no, I'm not sending you to therapy. You're fine. I'm happy to promote you. But, you will hear things. You will have to deal with things. And I want you to check in with yourself and talk to someone about this, also your emotions. You like some of the people, you don't like some of the people. You've been a colleague, and now I'm making you a manager. I mean, you're ahead of them all of a sudden, and things get messy. You as an old friend, you're going for a beer, and all of a sudden you have to cut the holiday. I mean, it's not fun. Yeah. So, there's messy stuff, and I want you to have someone to talk to. So that's how the supervision idea came, and they're doing it for some time until they feel more comfortable with these new challenges, and they have really arrived in their role as a team leader.
Sounds amazing. What a awesome opportunity for their leadership development, really.
In theory.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets messy.
Yeah, some people will.
All right.
It's not for them, I guess, as well. That's the other angle, isn't it? We delve deeper.
Oh, leadership is very hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
Not everybody's born to be a leader, and some people are really good on their job, and you think you should promote them, and you realize quite quickly that maybe they're great in their job and they know what they're doing. But being a leader as well, as you said, you've got all of a sudden, you used to have one head, do the numbers or do the stuff, and you've got this nailed. And all of a sudden you have like four more heads. You've got to present stuff, you've got to manage stuff, you've got to have a boss breathing down your neck who is always used to be like, when I talk to my regular employees, I'm like, hey, oh, cool. Whoa, if I talk to my management, it's different.
Yeah, it's a whole new skill set that is expected of you, basically.
Yeah, I was like, Merry Christmas. That's it. All right. Okay. It's enough about me. I just wanted to show people who are maybe therapists, who are maybe into the spiritual world, usually on my podcast. I just wanted them to demonstrate that stuff that you're trying to do or you're doing is really slippery slope. I'm saying it again. It's not easy, because there are so many levels, and it's a dynamic setting. It's on a live structure. Companies are very much live structure. People change position. Things are happening. Teams are changing. So these settings are very much alive.
Yeah, they absolutely are. And I think there's no perfect solution, is there? And there are always going to be barriers. I come up against them. The challenges of some leaders are on board, some aren't. You'll want to train people, and I'll get a pushback around it being a tick box exercise. And a cultural thing too, right? If they've seen a lot of change in an organization, they just think, here's just another thing. It's just another thing that's being thrown at us. In fact, it's another thing we have to do. Sometimes that can be the response. And, it's not a perfect solution, but when you train wellbeing ambassadors, the process of it, ideally, is that you are actually in some ways training the early adopters, the people who are buying into it. And when you can do that in an organization, they then start to influence and impact everybody else. It's like those seeds are being sown rather than, everybody's got to do this one thing. We're introducing it in much more of a gentle way. It's kind of more relatable to them. What is it about this that is beneficial? And if you can do that at the leadership level, it stops feeling like a tick box because you're seeing the people above you doing it. It starts to be the norm. It starts to be part of the culture. And it's surprising how just like one or two small little shifts in the way a manager maybe has a conversation with you can have such an impact. There's lots of research now around, the idea that you do lots of global surveys, certainly in the UK, global surveys that have found that employees do want more from their manager about mental health. Quite large numbers would say that the impact the manager has on the mental health is quite dramatic in the workplace. And so, you're talking about the sort of this moving feet. If we can continuously train leaders, and that's for me, the challenge is getting into an organization and say, I might run the training, but as you say, well, next week there's a new manager's come in or somebody's been moved up. What kind of develops that? And my kind of next vision and something I've launched this year is actually licensing the training of the Wellbeing Ambassador program. So I now have other facilitators, external, some independent coaches that are running the training. So they're doing that in different industries that I'm not engaged in or different parts of the country. But also going in and getting bigger organizations which have a lot higher turnover, much more of this sort of flexible changes taking place, that they can get their internal L&D teams, their learning and development facilitators to be able to train people as wellbeing ambassadors. So the goal ultimately for me is that might happen at the sort of leadership development level. So, new leaders are being trained up or somebody comes in and they're being onboarded, that they are automatically invited to become a wellbeing ambassador. They're invited to the training that's being run internally. So they're not dependent on me kind of coming in. It starts to be something that's really integrated into the whole organization so they can keep that momentum and keep that change in line with their approach.
You basically took my next question, so to say, up front, but this is the next chapter. Let's now really focus on organizations. We have several structures of questions around. I guess the most simple one we should address real quick. What is the average size of company that you deal with, or where you think it makes sense starting to implement this? And do you have some preference industries where you say, this is really working well, this is where I got my foot into the door because they really need it or they're really open for it? So that's these kind of questions. And then, let's take it from there.
Okay. For me, the scale or size of the organization, in the most part, it's been relatively sort of small to medium-sized enterprises that I've been working with. I'm in conversations at the moment with a much bigger company, which will be very exciting if they engage with that, because it'll be on a much considerably larger scale and global. I see the impact happen when I'm really getting access to the leadership team, the sort of high level. So when I'm working with the chief people officer or one of the directors who's really engaged with this idea and believes in it. And that's...
So from 200-300 people upwards, but not smaller.
Yeah. I mean, the only time I've done it with smaller groups is being a university, for example, brought me in to do it with their student leaders. And they had people who were in the position to support other students. And so they became wellbeing ambassadors, for example. So they had a smaller number. And that can have a very powerful effect because within their community, their number was quite large. And so what we really say is, 1 to 20 in an organization. If you've got one wellbeing ambassador to 20 people, that's maybe a possible ratio. But because I've really focused in the last year and a half on training leaders specifically, if every leader in an organization, every people manager, should we say, everybody who has the responsibility of managing other people, if each of those was trained as a wellbeing ambassador, the cultural shift would start to be dramatic because you're not just doing it with the HR team, who I often get to work with HR teams. They're really engaged. They really believe in this stuff. and they can have an impact. But if the manager who's running the appraisals, who's speaking to the person about, like you said, can I have this holiday, not have this holiday? Yes, they've got to make difficult choices, but how they do that, how they approach that, how they manage that, if they can do it with a strengths-based approach, with a understanding, a recognition of well-being for that person and the different nuances of well-being for the person, then the outcome and impact on somebody's mental health and well-being is profound.
And the key industries that you've reciprocate the best?
Yeah, I haven't. I guess, it's probably some data I should look into, really. It's been quite wide-ranging. A lot of what happens for me is recommendations, from somebody.
All right.
Coach it, guys, spreads from
all over the place.
Fair enough. Yeah.
I can see you're eyeing world domination. So that's I'm not in one corner. I'm all over the globe.
It's interesting because the licensing process has really opened up that door. Somebody is really engaged who is currently doing her master's in London in UEL, and yet she's from Botswana and she wants to train to become licensed to deliver it and take it back to Botswana. So, it's those kind of things that does excite me. I can't help it. It just feels like, yes, this is having an impact and people are seeing the worth in it. And they do want to take it to their culture, to their industry, to their country.
Right. Now, of course, the logic question when you want to train so many levels of management, I guess the first question is, how long does it take? I guess that's the number one question.
Yes. So it's designed as 3 modules, which are 2-hour sessions, whether delivered online or in person. And typically we do that over a 3-week period, so that there is in between that, there is reflective exercises, there's tools to sort of experiment with, try out, so that we come back, we see what worked, what didn't work, and we're really starting to embed it. And the feedback on that is really people enjoy that process, that they're gaining more. It's not just like one and done. They're actually taking it in, seeing what happens, and being able to come back and ask questions, really, and hear what other people's experiences were. So typically it's 3 weeks, but the actual kind of contact time are these 2-hour modules.
I think that's fairly reasonable.
Yeah, I think that's the response I'm getting. And I think for leaders, finding 2 hours is reasonable. Like blocking out 2 hours, they can find 2 hours. They're busy, but they can find 2 hours, over a 3-week period. So that in itself, the sort of structure of it's been quite successful in that way.
And it's so wonderfully post-COVID, right? There is no fancy luxury hotel and the minibar. It's 2 hours on Zoom. That's what you get.
Yeah, it is definitely. I mean, I launched this, the first time I ever ran it was in January 2020. So before everything got locked down. And it was in person, because that was the natural way. I have since done it in person, which I do really enjoy. I do feel there's an energy in a room where you're with someone, the ability to be able to work with leaders who often aren't all even in the same place. They're in the same team, but they're not even in the same location. So to be able to do it online, and just like we're having this conversation now, it's a gift, I think.
I used to send people for personal training to Hawaii for a week, and now it's a yogi bar. Times have changed. Well done for this. Here's your yogurt. Times are hard. All right, so this I think is a manageable structure, and if the follow-ups will be and better integrated, I really can see such a huge benefit. Now, you said you're coming on a top level. You're talking with HR. And I think we have some understanding what are your bullet points, what is your sales pitch, so to say. That nevertheless, one more time in a compressed version, give us your sales pitch, like if I would be in HR, just one more time, just to basically recapitulate what we had so far and hear it with fresh ears.
Yeah, so the Wellbeing Ambassador Program is really designed to give your leaders a toolkit to understand their own well-being so that they don't get to the point of burnout looking after everybody else, while also developing practical strategies that they can integrate into their existing leadership practice, which allows people to have a proactive approach to create a whole organizational approach to well-being, so that we're not just supporting people at crisis point, but we're actually allowing people to thrive. And that's when we see the impact in performance in the workplace, performance on an individual level, and this state of well-being that is sustainable.
And this book, of course, follows this program, explains it, lines it out, helps maybe people who are like maybe much smaller companies who do not have access to your direct service. This book is a how-to thing that people might be able to implement some tools on its own, or it's just more like a philosophical outline.
No, it's very much designed as a how-to guide. There's a lot of research in there. So for those people who do like to know, there's an evidence base there, sort of structure in the background, and the reasoning behind it all is included in there too. And it kind of outlines the process of how might you develop a well-being ambassador strategy in your organization and the hiccups and the challenges you might face. So it's very much a practical tool with the invite that you use what works for you and perhaps reach out to somebody who's qualified and experienced in the field to support you further.
Oh, that comes to the next question. I mean, how you're always taking my questions away. That's not fair. I mean, I only have so little. So basically, I'm now sitting in California, I'm sitting in Mumbai, I'm sitting in Melbourne, and I think, oh, I've got some background as training or yoga teacher or whatever. You know, I always wanted to go in corporate training. And when I was a little girl, I just wanted to go to corporate training. They'll reach out to you. Do you train the trainers? You said you're licensing. Are you there yet? Or are you ready to start doing this? Or that's the next step that someone like me, not me, I mean, I'm not serious, but somebody who's actually serious will contact you and then you will give him a training. And how long would it take to take your program and then approach some Fortune 500 and say, hello, here I am. I'm going to make you happy.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that I sort of put out there as eligibility. So I'm not looking for the academic qualifications specifically that I've got, my background in psychology, but certainly an interest or an experience or some knowledge in the area of mental health and well-being, or certainly wanting to learn and develop and understand more. And, one of my licensees does have a background in mindfulness training. Someone else does have a master's in positive psychology. But the idea is that you've got that interest and that's initially there. The other thing is that they're really experienced facilitators already. So my training that I run to get somebody to be licensed isn't about teaching someone how to teach or how to facilitate, how to deliver. So they already need to have that group management skill set, which, it's about timings. It's like, how do you get a point across? How do you manage when somebody asks a question you don't know the answer to, or they ask a question and it's perhaps a little bit too personal to answer in a group setting? So how do you do that without shutting them down? So really having the group facilitation skill set there is really important. But the training that I run is initially it's 2 days where we go through, really explore the theory, the background, the depth behind the training so that people have that grounding and understanding why they're doing it. And therefore they're much more prepared for the questions that might come up. And then there's an online training platform where I have demos of me delivering each of the 3 modules so that they get to see what does that look like? How do I transition from this piece to this piece? What's the link? And so that kind of upskills them from a really practical point of view. And then they have see all the content and the guides. I have written sort of guidance notes for each element of the modules. So that kind of supports them through that process. And then there's ongoing CPD. So if they actually come on board, they kind of get through the application process and they do the training, then we meet on a regular basis so that questions can come up. And if there's new ideas or new research that needs to be integrated, because this is evidence-based, so it will evolve. But that's the nature of something. If we're keeping up with current research, the program will develop and evolve. And I want to stay at the top of my game. And part of doing that will be interacting with my licensees.
And in the end of the day, they have a nice diploma and they can go out there and approach the clients and give the service.
Exactly. So they come out with a certification as being a licensed facilitator, and they're then allowed to use the logo of the Wellbeing Ambassador Program. The licensing is done through my company, Goldcrest. So the certificates, for example, have that dual branding on it, so that there's a standardization there so we know across the world, one day across the world, that the Wellbeing Ambassador Program is based on this core content and it's standardized.
And do you know, because countries have very different structures. Some have like personal coaching is for free. Anyone could do it. And some require a license, but I guess you're not registered in all of these countries yet. But there's a bit of administration drag, right? It's not easy what you're trying.
No, and I'm not global yet. So I haven't had to face all those challenges. working with people within the UK is
In
quite
UK,
at the moment.
you have to be licensed by the government to do this, or no?
No, you don't. Because
how lucky.
we're not therapists, and I'm not a therapist.
Doesn't
I'm not
matter.
training anybody to be. They're not working in a clinical setting.
In my country, it's 3 years just for chit chat.
Oh, okay. Just to be
3 years full.
in an organization.
30,000 is the cheapest solution.
Okay.
And you're not a therapist.
Okay. Yeah. Well, not
Something
a thing.
like a life coach, very basic life coach, 30,000 euros and 3 years.
Yeah. What I'm focusing on, from my background, I'd hate to think of the numbers in monetary value of like training and experience that I've worked through to get to this point. But all of the people that I'm bringing in, I want them to have that level of experience and background, because it's not just the STEM qualifications. It's like, how do you hold space, right? In any training situation in an organization, it's how do you manage that group, and how do you create that feeling of psychological safety, confidentiality, and invite the questions, but also be able to handle it when things maybe don't come as you expected.
And maybe for all the people listening and thinking, should I do this now? She's talking to Fortune 500 companies who are global. So maybe it's a smart business move, because if you sign the big fat contract with worldwide organizations, then you all of a sudden need a worldwide training team. So There you go, everybody.
Yeah, I like you're thinking big for me, which is great. Yeah, it's exciting time for me. It's definitely.
I don't know how else. Look at me, I'm a big guy.
The momentum is building. So yeah, let's see where it goes. It's definitely exciting times.
The smallest pizza I order has family size. All right, thank you so much. I think we had a good presentation. I think, did I miss something crucially, or did we cover the field?
I think we've covered the field pretty well.
Right. Maybe at the end, or if it comes to mind, you think it's fitting. If not, we'll end the podcast here. But if you maybe know one person personally that had a better impact, like a little 2-3 minutes life story of, I know this guy, he did it, and now he's more content with his team. Does something comes to mind, or this is already, we moved on?
I can share the fact that it was actually done. I mentioned the university that did it with students, and they actually had funding for that. And the lecturer had to put together the research report and the findings and the outcome. And so for me, that was really exciting, because the Wellbeing Ambassador Program was actually part of a research study. And they found that the students who were leading and supporting others not only impacted their personal well-being, but they actually created these supportive communities. And they saw huge positive changes specifically in the residential element of being a student. So in first-year students coming in. And that was, like a really, obviously slightly different out of the corporate environment, but the fact that there was some research done, it wasn't just anecdotal. She took it a little bit deeper than that to get the analysis of what was going on with them and the impact.
It's almost warm and fuzzy. I was hoping you're telling me of a man who used to kick dogs, and now he's cuddling all day long because he's now warm and fuzzy, and he started to feel we podcasters, we go low as can be. All right, thank you so very much. I think we get it, that this is really something that burns on a slow stove, but nevertheless, it's very persistent, it's ongoing, it's continuous, and it's transforming, not the Big Bang, not the talking to aliens element. This is something for real, hands-on, and it's step by step. And it is maybe not the crazy story with the cuddly animal, but it's changing people's life and the way we talk each other and respect each other and listen to each other. So actually, it's a big thing. Thank you so very much, Claire, for sharing this information with us today.
Thank you for having me.